Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Chicago at the People's Summit. Now joining us is one of the people behind the People's Summit who helped craft all of this, Michael Lighty. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Paul.
Michael is the Director of Public Policy for the National Nurses Union. Going into all of this, what did you hope would come out of this? It's kind of a unique moment, historical moment. Sanders' candidacy is at an unprecedented scale. Challenge the corporate Democratic Party, maybe come a little bit short. We were talking off camera before that some people seem to be in despair about Sanders losing, when I think it's rather miraculous that the campaign did what it did, and there's a moment where 3,000 people have gathered to talk about what's next. And I find it very interesting that what next is certainly not let's go all out and elect Hillary Clinton the next president. Yes, defeat Trump, but most of the discussion here is what's next for the movement. So explain that framing to me.
The movement existed before Bernie. Bernie coalesced a lot of movement forces that had been building since Seattle, really, if you think about it, where we went after the WTO, Occupy, Black Lives Matter. Even the resurgence in some places of union militantism has been a factor, has contributed to the soil out of which grew the Sanders campaign. So it's natural that it was never about Bernie and it never ends with Bernie, so that it always goes beyond that. And so we frame this as our movement moment to understand that it's not really a pivot so much as a continuation. And that continuation is all those folks were working to stop Keystone XL, working to stop fracking, in the case of nurses working for improved Medicare for all, found a home here. And what we found is that now we're meeting in explicitly movement terms after having worked together on the campaign to figure out what is it that we need to do collectively to build the movement, and part of that is electing down ballot candidates. Part of it is electoral.
Well, I was about to say that there's a lot of discussion about electing down ballot congressional fights, state legislature fights, and so on, something Sanders called for Thursday night when he made his statement. In terms of the basic framing, I'm hearing almost nothing about the Democrats and supporting Clinton for the presidential election. Clearly defeating Trump means a vote for Clinton, but there's almost no talk about that half of the equation.
I'll tell you something, Paul, and it might sound a little harsh, but in some sense, Hillary Clinton is irrelevant to this event because it was never about Hillary. It was always about an affirmative agenda for change, for transformation. And so that's the beauty of a movement. A movement makes demands, a movement is aspirational. And so when we organize around these values of solidarity and justice, then we're talking about something that's not related to a specific candidate, certainly, and not even a campaign. And so we knew whether Bernie was elected or someone else, we were going to have something in place in January of 2017 that we didn't have in place in January 2009.
Yeah, the death of these kinds of movements has always been no second act.
That's right.
You guys seem to actually be planning a second act, and should I say, even thinking about 2020, a third act.
That's right. You should say that. We have what Roseanne DeMauro, our executive director, calls Vision 2020. And that vision is very clear. When you hear folks like Nina Turner and Tulsi Gabbard, you have a vision for what's possible for the kind of candidates who come out of this movement.
So the focus will be on congressional down-ticket races in 2016. I would guess even more so in 2018, which I assume means a serious campaign to primary corporate Democrats.
Yes. And some of that's happening this year. For example, we're very proud to support Tim Canova against Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Proud or gleeful?
All right, both. And so she earned it. Let's face it. I don't think, though, that we should limit this to electoral politics. I think we need to understand that these candidates they start first with issues and with program, and depending on their relationship to that program, their commitment to it, and their base of supporters, their constituency around that program, that is out of which grows their candidacy. And so we need to understand this as a movement tactic. Electoral politics, like civil disobedience, like legislative campaigns and lobbying. That's what we want to bring here. We want to bring these identities that have been parsed up by identity politics, reinforced by the liberalism of Hillary Clinton's campaign. Recognize those shared interests, shared program, and vision, and use that as the basis then to say, okay, candidate, we expect you to carry out this program, we will hold you accountable to this program, and we will expect you to be a leader in our movement for that program, not as a special person of high regard, but as one of us activists engaging in your arena as we all engage to make those transformations.
Yeah, the formulation we've talked about on The Real News, I don't think it's original, but the idea of a movement with candidates. And then part of that idea is some way where the candidates, when elected, become accountable to the movement. How do you see that?
It's working in Chicago. It's working here. Reclaim Chicago is a model for exactly that. As we speak, Carla Rosa, who was elected based on a pledge to a program, and then an organization was built around his campaign that is ongoing, that is working on those same issues, that he knows he has to champion, or we will then push back on him. And we've also seen it in Chicago, where a Congress member was elected by that same organization and abandoned the program, Robin Kelly, and has now lost their endorsement, lost their community support, but the pressure continues on her. So that is literally the model, and Chicago is a place where it's happening.
What do you hope is achieved at the fight at the convention? When Sanders spoke on Thursday night, he had two big calls to action, I guess. The second was this down ticket fight, but what's next is the fight at the Democratic Party convention. So how do you see that unfolding? What are your objectives?
Our objectives are, we share Tulsi Gabbard's objective to reform the party and eliminate superdelegates. We think that's a righteous and appropriate fight for the convention. We expect that the movement will be in the hall and demand a platform that reflects those movement demands. We think that the corporate domination of the party will prevent that, likely, but we also know there are Hillary delegates. If they were able to vote their politics, if they were released to vote their politics on the issues, would be with us. The majority of those folks in the room, not the lobbyists and the special interest superdelegates, are with us on our program. And so we believe that we actually all represent the base of the Democratic Party and the constituency of the Democratic Party, but not the leadership or the institutional interests of it. And so we expect that clash.
Yeah, you told me off camera when I had said that a lot of people were wondering how much this would be framed as kind of herding people into the Democratic Party, which a lot of people were suggesting Sanders would eventually do, and so far is not. What's your attitude towards third parties?
Well, let's first make a distinction, Paul, between voting for Hillary Clinton and herding people into the Democratic Party. Voting for Hillary Clinton is a defensive act against Trump. Adopting a program for transformational change, like improved Medicare for all, a Robin Hood tax, quality free public college education, those kinds of programs are an affirmative program that are not partisan and not party-based. And so we're going to work on those issues within the party and outside of it. It is what Tim Carpenter used to call, from Progressive Democrats of America, inside outside. The third party question is live. We welcome that discussion, and we think at the national level you have to account for the difference in level of success between a Bernie Sanders running as a Democrat versus a Green Party candidate, Ralph Nader or Jill Stein, running as a third party. And that success is formidable. Putting issues like democratic socialism on the table, on the agenda, organizing, coalescing a political movement around that ideological position. That has not happened with third parties. Tom Gallagher has written a very good book on that called The Primary Route, and believes that Democrats, if those working the Democratic Party on the left were active in the primary season each 4 years, you would have an infrastructure that could actually elect a nominee over a period of cycles. So that's the contest, and let's have that debate. There are third-party advocates here. They are on the agenda. They're speaking about that. But at the national and at the local level, there's great interest in that. We've endorsed a number of Green candidates at the local level. But you have to account for the difference of level of success between what Bernie achieved.
All right, so let's go back to the convention. I've been asking this question to a few people. I'll frame it the same way. The Democratic Party, I think, if one looks at it objectively, it's like a united front in a sense. You have the class of hedge fund guys and Silicon Valley guys and Hollywood billionaires and a whole section of the billionaire class that Sanders attacks, that they are the corporate Democrats. And we know Hillary Clinton and others are the face of that. And you have trade unions, and obviously there's a split in the trade unions about unions that are, satisfied to have tea at the White House and get very excited by that, and others who don't seem to depend on having that tea. Your union being one of that small group, and you have masses of ordinary working and other kinds of people in the party. So it's a real broad front. Except it's a broad front whose leadership and control has always been the hedge fund guys, essentially. It's Wall Street, really. It's Wall Street money that fuels all of this. So this isn't just a debate about policy. It's not just a debate about who's got the best idea to get to the same objectives, the way the Clinton campaign and the media seems to want to say. This is a fundamental difference of interest. And that fight, as it plays itself out, if it's really waged, it does not lead to just like, one side goes and say, okay, you won the vote. Okay, now me hedge fund guys, we're going to be all for social democracy or whatever. It doesn't end that way. It ends as a bloodbath, really, which I'm not suggesting is a bad thing. How do you see this unfolding?
I think that's a very important analysis, Paul, because there are these structural reforms we mentioned about the party, but ultimately it's an ideological and political question.
And a question of interest.
And interest, yeah. Whose interests is the party serving? Literally, because that's what parties are. They serve the interests of their constituency. They institute, the perks and resources and policies that benefit their constituency is what the party is supposed to deliver. And that is clearly they've delivered for the Wall Street 1%. And you can't change that inside the party. You have to change that from the outside and from the bottom up. So when we're talking about electing down ballot candidates, we're talking about eventually controlling the Democratic caucus in the House and the Senate. And so it is a process. And we've got to start thinking the long game more and understand what we can do with rules and what requires a movement to do. And those are clear distinctions important in both respects. So I think that no one believes that we're going to change the Democratic Party and fill it to no longer serve the interests of Wall Street. Not going to happen. Is Wall Street going to be weaker coming out of that convention? Are they weaker in the Democratic Party than they were a year ago? Yes, they are. Indeed, they are. And so we want, to do things that are going to sharpen that divide. We want that conflict within the Democratic Party to be further developed, not more conflict in that political sense.
So when you're planning long term and you say you've got a session 2020 coming and you have Tulsi Gabbard and Nina Turner on the podium there, both looking like they could be candidates in 2020, is that part of the scheming going on here?
It would be a kind of wish fulfillment, I think, if Tulsi Gabbard and Nina Turner were running for president. But that's obviously a choice. What we want to do is we want to make it less of an individual choice and more of a movement demand, that people like that rise up, carry out their campaigns because they're carrying our agenda. That's really what we want.
And when Sanders called for this down ticket fight, this everyone get involved, run even for school boards and such, he never said run for the Democratic Party. I thought that seemed like quite a conscious way to frame it.
Well, Bernie's an independent. Bernie's ran as a Democrat, and that was a big deal for him, as you know. I had the opportunity to introduce him at Tim Carpenter from Progressive Democrats of America Memorial, where Bernie was addressing a conference that was not originally planned as a memorial. And I had the opportunity to introduce Bernie, and the members of Progressive Democrats of America gave him petition signatures of 10,000 people urging him to run as a Democrat. And so there was a conscious effort to make that somewhere between strategic and tactical call to run as a Democrat. But he never said, I am a Democrat. And that is exactly the position I think everyone, not everyone, but that's the consensus position of the summit. We are active electorally as Democrats. We are not Democrats first, and we are not Democrats as
so it's more a tactic than a...
It is. And that's why I say to the third-party folks, third-party adherents elevate third-partyism to a principle. It is not a principle, it is a tactic. And you have to justify that tactic on strategic grounds. Is it building your movement? Is it furthering your issues? Is it challenging power and shifting power from them to you? Tactic.
And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't.
And that's a tactic. That's not a principle. and certainly not a moral. And so,
All right, thanks for joining me.
thank you.
And thank you for joining me on the Real News Network.